No one in the kingdom of Israel went to sleep believing the end was near. Night arrived as it always had. City gates closed with familiar weight. Torches burned steadily along the walls, casting long shadows over stone streets that had known centuries of footsteps. Inside the city, families rested, merchants prepared for the next day, and soldiers stood watch without fear, only habit. Nothing felt urgent, nothing felt fragile, and that was the danger. Israel had survived before. It had endured wars, betrayals, civil division, and moments that should have destroyed it. Each time, the kingdom recovered. Over generations, survival became expectation. Expectation hardened into confidence, and confidence slowly became certainty. Collapse was something that happened to others. Morning after morning, the rhythm of life repeated itself. Markets opened. Leaders ruled. Laws were enforced. From the outside, the kingdom looked stable, prosperous, even blessed. But history rarely destroys a nation from the outside first. It weakens it quietly. Prosperity softened memory. When life is comfortable, difficult questions are postponed. Injustice is tolerated because it seems temporary. Small compromises feel harmless. Israel did not change suddenly. It drifted. Leaders stopped asking what was right and began asking what would maintain calm. Responsibility was replaced by stability. Justice was replaced by order. Truth became less important than appearance, and the people accepted this language because it sounded safe. Peace, even fragile peace, felt better than uncertainty. So the kingdom continued, confident and comfortable, unaware that the foundation beneath it was slowly eroding. But not everyone was comfortable. There were voices that refused to be silent. Voices that warned the kingdom was losing something essential. They spoke of injustice hidden beneath prosperity, of power replacing truth, of a nation becoming strong in appearance but empty at its core. These voices did not promise victory. They promised consequences. And because of that, they were unwelcome. At first, they were tolerated, then mocked, eventually dismissed as dangerous. Israel listened just enough to feel informed, but not enough to change. Warnings became background noise, repeated so often they lost urgency. And when warnings are heard without action, they lose meaning. Far to the east, something was growing. Assyria did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a shadow, slow, silent, patient. It watched the kingdom carefully, studying its habits, its divisions, its confidence. Assyria understood something Israel had forgotten. Nations do not fall when they are weak. They fall when they believe they are safe. Israel knew Assyria existed. It knew its armies were disciplined and ruthless, but the threat felt distant, negotiable. Leaders believed time could be bought. That tribute would be enough. That diplomacy would delay disaster. And every year without invasion reinforced the illusion. But time bought without change does not save a kingdom. It only delays its collapse. Inside Israel, trust between leaders and people began to erode. Decisions were no longer explained. Injustice stopped shocking anyone. Silence became normal. The kingdom still functioned, but it no longer believed in itself. And when a people stops believing in itself, no wall is strong enough to protect it. The warnings grew more urgent, but the will to change grew weaker. Israel was already tired before the battle began, divided before the siege arrived, empty before the first blow was struck. Real change would have required sacrifice, and sacrifice always feels too expensive until there is no alternative. When Assyria finally moved, it did not face a united kingdom. It found fragments. Cities hesitated. Leaders distrusted one another. People were exhausted by promises that had never been kept. Some cities resisted out of pride. Others surrendered out of fear. Others negotiated in secret, thinking only of survival. There was no single collapse. There were many small surrenders. Alliances failed. Tribute lost value. Words no longer mattered. What once appeared to be careful diplomacy was revealed as dependence. Israel had traded long-term strength for short-term calm, and now nothing remained to trade. Then came Samaria. The siege was not only against walls, it was against time. Hunger weakened what weapons could not. Fear eroded what strength could not sustain. Inside the city, desperation spread quietly, then openly. Only then did the questions finally emerge. When did this begin? When did we stop being a kingdom? And the answer was painful. It began long before the siege, long before the armies, long before the walls were tested. It began when warnings were ignored, when injustice became normal, when comfort was chosen over courage. Israel did not fall all at once. It fell by accumulation. When Samaria finally collapsed, it was not a shock. It was confirmation. The kingdom of Israel ceased to exist as a political power. Its people were scattered, families separated, identity fractured. Memory itself began to fade. Not because the enemy was unstoppable, but because the kingdom could no longer sustain itself. And the story does not end there. Because this is not only the story of Israel, it is the story of any nation that mistakes stability for safety. Any society that hears warnings and chooses to listen tomorrow. Any people that believe surviving once guarantees survival forever. The kingdom of Israel did not ignore one warning. It ignored many, for far too long. And when it finally tried to respond, there were no decisions left that did not carry consequences. That is how kingdoms fall. Not in a single moment, but through comfort, silence, delay, and the belief that there will always be time. Israel did not fall all at once. It fell by accumulation. When Samaria finally collapsed, it was not a moment of shock or sudden disbelief. It was a quiet confirmation of something that, deep down, many already knew. The kingdom of Israel ceased to exist as a political power, but its disappearance did not feel dramatic at first. There was no single sound that marked the end. No final announcement. Just silence, where certainty used to be. Families were separated. People were forced onto unfamiliar roads, carrying only what they could hold. Names that once meant something powerful were reduced to memories whispered in passing. Traditions survived only in fragments, passed quietly from parent to child, uncertain if they would endure another generation. The enemy did not need to erase Israel completely. Time would do that. What remained was confusion. Survivors searched for meaning in what had happened. They asked when the kingdom truly began to die. Was it during the siege? Was it when the first city surrendered? Or was it long before that, when warnings were ignored and injustice became routine? The most painful realization came slowly. The fall had started when everything still seemed fine, when markets were full, when walls were strong, when leaders spoke calmly and promised stability. Israel did not collapse because it lacked strength. It collapsed because it lost direction. It forgot what had once held it together. It traded shared responsibility for personal comfort. It exchanged courage for delay. And every delay made the next decision heavier, until no decision remained that did not demand loss. History would later summarize the fall in a few simple lines: dates, names, battles, conquests, but those lines could never capture the weight of living through it. The uncertainty, the regret, the knowledge that something precious had been lost, not all at once, but piece by piece. And this is why the story endures, because it is not only the story of Israel, it is the story of any nation that confuses stability with safety, Any society that believes surviving past dangers guarantees survival forever. Any people who hear warnings and choose to wait, believing there will always be more time. The kingdom of Israel did not ignore a single warning. It ignored many, for years. And when it finally tried to change, it discovered that change no longer came without consequences. What once required courage now required sacrifice. What once demanded attention now demanded loss. That is how kingdoms fall. Not in a single moment of fire or noise, but through comfort, silence, and the quiet belief that tomorrow will always arrive unchanged. And when tomorrow finally comes different, it is already too late to return. And when tomorrow finally comes different, it is already too late to return. What remains then is not panic, but realization. The kind that arrives slowly when there is nothing left to fix, when choices have already been made, and all that is left is to live inside their consequences. The people of Israel did not wake up to chaos. They woke up to absence, to the quiet understanding that something once certain was gone. They carried the weight of that knowledge with them as they walked unfamiliar roads. Every step away from Samaria was also a step away from a life they believed would last forever. The past became heavier than the future, because the future no longer had a shape. Some tried to remember the kingdom as it was at its height. Others avoided memory altogether, because remembering hurt too much. Both were attempts to survive what could not be undone. Generations later, the story would be told simply: a kingdom rose and a kingdom fell. But those who lived it knew the truth was far more complex. The fall was not a single event. It was a series of moments when change was possible and postponed. That is why this story still matters, not because of what happened to Israel, but because of how it happened. Because it reminds us that endings rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, wrapped in comfort, disguised as normal days. And by the time they reveal their true shape, the path back has already disappeared. What was lost with the kingdom of Israel was not only land or power, it was the chance to choose differently while choice was still possible. And that is the part history cannot restore. What was lost with the kingdom of Israel was not only land or power, it was the chance to choose differently while choice was still possible. And that is the part history cannot restore, because once that moment passes, no victory can replace it. No rebuilding can fully recover it. A kingdom can be conquered and rebuilt. Cities can rise again from ruins. Names can be remembered, and stories can be retold. But the opportunity to act before the fall, the moment when change could have come without destruction, is gone forever. That is the true cost of delay. Israel's story reminds us that the greatest losses are not always visible. They are not measured in walls destroyed or cities burned, but in decisions not taken, in courage postponed, in warnings heard and set aside. By the time loss becomes undeniable, it has already been shaping the future for years. And so, the ruins remain as silent witnesses, not only to what was taken, but to what was never chosen, to the paths that could have been followed, and the futures that never had the chance to exist. That is why the fall of the kingdom of Israel still speaks across centuries, not as a warning shouted in anger, but as a truth spoken quietly, to anyone willing to listen before it is too late.